Okay, what's the signal? Now?
Hi guys. Can you louder? Okay. Hi guys. All of us up here are part of the senior class committee, so we had an announcement for the seniors out there to remind you of 2 awesome events we have coming up tomorrow.
First, there's dinner at Edinburgh, regular dining hours for seniors only. Freshmen will be eating at the houses, so make sure that all seniors come to eat in Edinburgh. It's going to be a special menu just for seniors. And then after that, we have the Slim Chance Dance, which is a stoplight party. So green means go, yellow means let me think about it, and don't mess with these 2. It's at the liquor store, which is 25 Bolton Place. It's right next to the Big Easy. Starts at 10. First 250 people get free drink tickets, so I hope to see you guys there. Thanks, Tom.
Hi, good morning. Welcome. So, what I want to do today is continue the lecture from before spring break. And let me recap a little bit what we talked about then, because there's a lot of change. Can everyone hear now? Who cannot hear? All right. So before spring break, what we talked about, remember the theory X versus theory Y. We talked about McGregor's work, very important work, essentially launched the human relations side of organizational behavior, alongside with Mary Follett Parker, alongside Mayo with the Hawthorne effect. And remember the Hawthorne effect, where they showed that the light, when they turned up the light, people worked harder. Where they turned down the light, people continued to work harder, illustrating that it's not about just the technical aspects of productivity, but there is a human side where people are motivated and work harder as a result of attention, or as a result of being cared for, or feeling that they're cared for. Other studies that show a similar effect of how the psychology within an organization matters. And the basic premise is that theory X and theory Y are both right. And they're both right because they're self-fulfilling prophecies. If you expect your employees to be theory X, they are more likely to behave according to theory X. If you expect theory Y, which is more generous, benevolent, trustworthy, hardworking, they're more likely to live up to your expectations. Beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, this doesn't happen 100% of the times. A few of you have asked me about this after the previous lecture. There are certain times when no matter what you expect, positive or negative, the employee or the follower will behave as he or she would have regardless of your expectations. So there are some people who will work hard whether or not you're theory X or Y. There are some people who will not work hard regardless of your high or low expectations. There are some people who will cheat the system regardless of your putting trust in them or not. However, the overwhelming majority of people will react to your expectations from them. The same person can behave according to theory X or Y depending on the leader that he or she has. There's a lot of research that shows that. At the same time, let's say you're a new leader and you start working in an organization, do you start with theory Y on day one? The answer is yes, in terms of your conscious expectations from people. The answer is no in terms of your behavior. What do I mean by the distinction between your conscious or cognitive expectations and your actual behavior? If you're new in an organization, you don't know the people. You want to first understand how much you can delegate to them. It's not coming into the first day and saying, I trust you fully, and then going ahead and give and delegating. That would be irresponsible. But a theory Y leader, an effective theory Y leader, would go in and ask, okay, so let me see what the employees are capable of, and I know that they're capable of more. So remember the story that I told about my commander in the military? The theory Y commander, the first day that he came in, he didn't just say, okay, do whatever you want. He watched us, he worked with us with an eye to giving us more and more responsibility over time, by delegating more and more trust and by teaching us, and thereby expanding our capabilities. So it doesn't mean that on the first day of work, the theory Y manager, the effective theory Y manager, just relinquishes all responsibility. Far from it. But there is a conscious decision to, over time, expand the capacities of the employees, knowing that they are capable. Let me move on from this research to another strand of research, arguably the most important research within leadership development. That is something that we've spoken about before, the Pygmalion effect. Specifically, Scott Snook talked about it in his lecture. What is the Pygmalion effect? Robert Rosenthal, who was a professor here, the head of the department for many years, went into a school and told the teachers, again, I'm just going to briefly give you the outline of the research. Well, he told the teachers that some of the students are what he called fast spurters. In other words, students that was in first grade to fourth grade who would make a cognitive jump this year. And he ran tests and he said these are new tests developed at Harvard to identify fast spurters. And then, actually, unbeknownst to the teachers, these were regular IQ tests. He went and he told the teachers, you cannot tell these students that they are fast spurters. He went away and came back at the end of the year again. What he found at the end of the year was remarkable change. These students, who the teachers believed were fast spurters, unbeknown to them, they were chosen randomly from among the students. These students who were fast spurters performed better academically, both in the quote-unquote subjective subjects such as English, but also in the objective tests in math, for instance. They improved significantly over that year, even though the teacher wasn't allowed to explicitly tell them that they were expected to become better. But implicitly, this is the message that they conveyed. And also, and here is the key result, their IQ actually increased over the year significantly. Now, IQ is supposed to be a measure that you're born with, right? Your intelligence quotient in your genes, or at most your early years. And what he showed that it wasn't the case. Their IQ actually changed over this year because of expectations. The Pygmalion effect coming from the Pygmalion from ancient Greece, later Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, and then My Fair Lady, the musical, was made. So this is where the name came from. With high expectations, students performed better and became smarter. After 1967, this was replicated many times in schools and also in organizations. The person writing about it, Sterling Livingston, wrote, "What managers expect of subordinates and the way they treat them largely determine their performance and career progress." So what they did was they went in, did the similar study. They went into an organization, had them take tests, and randomly said to the supervisors, these are your top performers. They have the capacity to do well. And these top performers actually became top performers. Their levels of absenteeism from work went down, turnover went down, performance, productivity went up significantly because of expectations, even though they were just randomly chosen from the group of employees. John Gardner, a leadership scholar, when the faith is present in the leader, it communicates itself to followers with powerful effect. In the conventional mode, people want to know whether the followers believe in the leader. A more searching question is whether the leader believes in the followers. It works both ways. Beliefs as self-fulfilling prophecies. You get, very often, what you expect. I want to reiterate something that Professor Scott Snook said when he was lecturing here. He recounted a meta-analysis conducted by Avoli and Luthans, two of the leading scholars in the field of leadership and leadership development. So they did a meta-analysis looking at all the studies on leadership development over the past 100 years. And here is what they found. The largest developmental impact was raising the positive beliefs of followers, instilling in them the conviction that they were better at performance tasks than they thought. Another interesting byproduct of this research, or I should say a corollary of this research in an entirely different area, marriage. The number one predictor of happy marriages is if the spouse believes that the husband or wife are better than they believe about themselves. In other words, if they have high expectations of them, look at them in a positive light, they're more likely to succeed in the long term in marriage and be happier. Now think about it. Many people would call this illusions. There's a lot of research in psychology on the positive illusions. But as we've mentioned before, these are not illusions. These are simply seeing the potential. That's seeing a seed. Now, if I see a seed and say this can be a tree, am I being delusional? Is it an illusion? Even though it is not a tree? Absolutely not, because I see the potential there. Appreciative inquiry. This is the whole premise of it. You appreciate the positive. You make it grow. Doesn't mean ignoring the negative, but you appreciate the positive, which is what this course is very much about. And this is also what you're going to do this week within your coaching groups. Yeah, you're going to talk about things that didn't work, but mostly you're going to be appreciating the positive, making it grow, having high expectations, the number one developmental tool that you have, and it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do, but the problem is that it's done so little. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of my research that I do in this area. And I'm talking to you about it after you have done some research in this area, your response paper for last week. So your response paper was interviewing a parent or someone who is older, who has had significant work experience, and asking them a few questions. Remember the questions? Tell us about the best leader that you had. Tell us about the worst leader or a bad leader that you had. And then, what were you like under the best leader, and what were you like under the bad leader? And the purpose of this experiment is to show the self-fulfilling prophecy nature of leadership, or how the behavior of the leader determines the behavior of the followers. Let me show you some samples. I did this research at the Harvard Business School where I interviewed MBA students. They come in, average age of an MBA student is 27. The ages range from 25 to 45 in my study. And what I asked them are these same questions. Not as leaders, but as followers. What were you like? Now, these are highly ambitious individuals, want to do well. Here they are, under bad leadership. How do they describe it? I'm taking just random quotes, or not so random, but just a few quotes. He was bright and he didn't tolerate fools, and they weren't fools. They were trying to get to understand what he was saying. He didn't trust others' capabilities as he did his own. Theory X. I wasn't given any guidance. He wasn't leading me or teaching me. I never got any feedback on ideas. The leader is teacher. He wasn't direct and honest enough to give the bad side. He was always selling the dream. Inauthentic leadership. He was above us all, flying with the eagles above while dealing with the turkeys below. Arrogance. Now, what were these MBAs? They weren't MBAs at the time, but what were these highly accomplished, very driven individuals like under these bad leaders? Again, a sample of quotes. I was cautious a lot of the time and I was frustrated. I didn't really throw myself into the job. Self-fulfilling prophecy. You get what you expect. I had no motivation. I didn't do anything that was particularly productive. I did what I was told. There was much turf fighting, infighting. It made for a lot of disputes. Conflict went up significantly. Teamwork goes down under Theory X. I was choosing the path of least resistance. I was doing the minimal work. I didn't excel. I didn't go beyond what the job required. Doing the minimum, trying to get away with as much as possible, trying to get to Friday. After a while, you become cynical about both the person and job. You really do the bare minimum. Now let's look at these same people, the mirror image, working for different employees. What were they like? He made us feel like there were no boundaries to what we could be doing. Expectations, self-fulfilling prophecy. He was very honest in his feedback with people. I always knew how I was doing. Remember what I've made the distinction very often. The best leaders are not leaders who are always nice to their employees in the sense of always giving them the good news. Rather, they're beautiful enemies, combining the beauty with the challenging part. You know where you are with these leaders. And while they challenge you, they challenge the behavior, never the person. Remember the distinction we made before break. He took the initiative to build morale in the office. He was sensitive. And after we had worked long hours, he made sure we had a great dinner. Simple things, little things. And you know what happens in organizations? That many people say, well, we need to up the bonus at the end of the year. And they up the bonus, and sure, it's motivating. But the little things are much more motivating in the long term. Showing that you care. Remember the Hawthorne effect. Just by showing that they care, by turning on the lights and off the lights, that was enough to increase productivity. By the way, same with relationships. You know, we think, well, I'll get them a big present, you know, a large wedding ring or a band or a diamond ring. These are the important things. Yeah, they're important and people care about them, sure. But the most important things are the little things, the details, remembering the flowers, the dinner, the nice conversation. These are the things that make the most difference in any relationship, also in a leadership-follower relationship. He was always willing to take a chance and trust people, give them responsibility and push them. If you give trust, you get trust back. Remember equity theory. People want to reciprocate what they receive. And finally, whenever we brought something up, he had the openness to listen to other people and make the changes. The idea that he actually listened to you made a difference. And this person told me that the leader wasn't always implementing the changes, but he always listened, always validated what the person had to say. So what were these MBAs? The same MBAs that before, remember, weren't working hard, just wanted to get to Friday, put off the work, did the bare minimum. What did these same people do under a different leader? I was a different personality for both leaders. I was more relaxed and enjoyed working with him. I brought in my personal interests, my humor. It's one of the first things that goes under Theory X, is humor. He's a guy I thought a lot of and wanted him to think a lot of me, so I worked the hardest. This is equity theory. Trust me, I want to reciprocate that trust. I was much happier, more productive. You move away from selfishness and toward more group-oriented ways of thinking. Group teamwork goes up significantly. I was calmer and more confident. There was psychological safety there. I wasn't afraid of failing. It's like a marriage, where you marry someone and this person brings out all the good things in you. It really is. Well, almost. Does this resonate with what you got in terms of your result? I mean, could you see this in your, not always, by the way, but very often, this is what happens. To summarize what Goethe said, treat a man as he is, and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he shall become as he can and should be. You, as a leader or as a parent, have a lot of influence on the men and women working with you. A lot of impact you can have. And the question is, what do you expect? Because it's your expectations that very often will determine the outcome. Now, one interesting thing that I found in this research is that, as I said, it wasn't always the case. Sometimes it worked the other way around. Because you see, as you can see from this model, it is circular. In other words, you can influence the web of leadership that Professor Kellerman talked about. You can influence the web of leadership anywhere on this loop. The easiest is with the leader assumptions and behaviors. But you can also do it with the followers' behaviors. In other words, it's not all contingent on the leader. Remember what Professor Kellerman talked about. To get bad leadership, you also need bad followers. And it works the other way too. To get effective leadership, very often you need good followers. About 10% of my sample, just under, told me how their behavior didn't change and how over time the leader's behavior changed, where they had high expectation of the leader. So, for example, the leader employed theory X, but they responded according to theory Y. They took initiative, they worked extremely hard regardless of what the leader was like. And over time, again, just under 10%, actually said that they changed the leader's behavior. More often than not, the people left. Again, these accomplished individuals could afford to work anywhere. I mean, they could find a job anywhere. It's what Peter Drucker says. Your best employees are volunteers. So they just left. But some people, either because they liked the organization or because they believed in their leader, they stayed out and sometimes, not always, but sometimes were able to influence the leader's assumptions and their expectations. Bertrand de Jouvenel, who is a politician and thinker, said, "A society of sheep must in time beget a government of wolves." And this is the Kellerman thesis. And it works the other way around as well. Kouzes and Posner in the research show a lot of evidence for the self-fulfilling prophecy being reciprocal, working both ways. For example, here is a follower. Warren Bennis. The follower who is willing to speak out shows precisely the kind of initiative that leadership is made of. Here is a follower who became a leader and transformed this country. Rosa Parks, a citizen discriminated against, But she stood up, or rather she sat down, for what she believed was right. Not only did she change her city, but she changed the country. This is an example of follower and leadership relations that are very much intertwined. I mean, what do you call her, a follower? Well, she became one of the leaders of the civil rights movement, so she's a leader too. At every point in our lives, whether we are beginning as analysts or interns, we have the capacity to lead with the right expectations, with the right compass. First, we need to understand what we are about. What do I stand for, or what do I sit for? What is not worth selling my soul for, or what is worth gaining my soul with? These are the important questions that we, as leaders, no matter where we are on the hierarchy, leadership doesn't just happen when we're CEOs. It's happening right now. The line between leadership and followership, this is the argument that Professor Kellerman is making in her next book and that she made in our last lecture, in our previous lecture. The line is really blurry, and no one blurs this line more than Robert Greenleaf. And what Greenleaf does, or did, he was a leadership scholar and read about these things, and suddenly, and one day he read Hermann Hesse's Journey from the East. And this is a book about a group of Westerners who went to the East and had a chaperone, a servant, that they took in order to show them around. And that chaperone shepherded them through the mountains, did what they asked him to do. And at the end of the trip, he disappeared. And it was at that point that they realized that he wasn't their servant, but rather their leader. And this book had a lot of impact. Book I highly recommend reading, Journey to the East. A lot of impact on Robert Greenleaf, who came up with the idea of servant leadership. And what he found through his research is that throughout the ages, and you look at religious leaders, you look at business leaders, you look at political leaders, the greatest ones perceive themselves as servants of the people. Nelson Mandela, one of the greatest leaders in history, spent 27 years in Robben Island, imprisoned. He comes out 1994. Just imagine what it's like. The whole world hasn't seen him for 27 years. Comes out to freedom. Cameras on him, the person who's going to lead South Africa in the post-apartheid era. Icons of our era. Cameras are on him. What is his first sentence to his people as he comes out? To his people and to the world. First and foremost to his people. I am your servant. Now this is a great leader. See, because traditionally, this is what the organizational chart looks like, right? This could be the president of the country, CEO of a company, chairman of the board, whatever it is. This is what traditionally the organizational chart looks like. What great leaders do is flip it upside down. They're at the bottom. They're serving. They're pushing up. They're serving the people working for them, who are serving the people working under them, all the way up to the citizens or the customers. Leader as servant. You see it with Anita Roddick, with Jack Welch, Herb Kelleher from Southwest Airlines, Mandela, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, as the servant, the Buddha. Confucius explicitly talks about this. Every great leader throughout history To paraphrase JFK, ask not what your followers can do for you, ask what you can do for your followers. This is the leader as servant. So what do you think about when you become a leader as servant? What do you think about when you want to create the most effective environment for your employees? The first thought, again, to go back to what Gandhi said, which I've quoted often, be the change you want to see in the world. It comes from leadership development, is very much about personal development. What do I want to see in the world? Let me become it. Do I want benevolence? Do I want generosity? Do I want openness? Do I want trustworthiness? Do I want compassion? Do I want hard work? What do I want to see in the world, or in my small world, my organization, or my family, and let me embody it? Remember the exercise with the cheek versus the chin. People will, or your followers will do what you do, not what you say, in most situations. Let me share some research on embodying leadership. Lieberman and Yalom and Miles. This was done out of Stanford back in 1973. This was a time when the human potential movement was at its peak. Some of you may remember or may know about the EST, or the Landmark Forum, or Anselm with Maslow, human potential movement at its peak. And what they wanted to understand was, why do some of these workshops work, whereas others do not? And what they found was that it depended largely on the person delivering the message rather than on the message itself. So even though two workshop leaders could deliver the exact same words, one was effective, one was ineffective, based on who the leader was. Did the leader embody the characteristics that he or she wanted to convey through the message? That determined more of the outcome than the message itself. More research. Modeling the way. McNeese Smith, the research she conducted was on showing or trying to identify the conditions that lead to highly productive groups. And she found that, yes, expectations matter a great deal. High expectations of the employees. But there was a caveat. It had to be coupled with walking your talk. You had to display high levels of productivity, hard work yourself, coupled with the expectations you had of others, and then you would get the most from them. It wasn't just, words were not enough. Words are not enough when we convey a vision to a country, to our organization, or to our kids. You read this, emotional contagion. One person can change the mood of the entire group, especially the leader, more than anyone. Daniel Goleman, who did the most work on emotional intelligence, who very much brought together a lot of the research on the topic. The leader's mood and behaviors drive the moods and behaviors of everyone else. A cranky and ruthless boss creates a toxic organization filled with negative underachievers who ignore opportunities. An inspirational, inclusive leader spawns acolytes for whom any challenge is surmountable. In terms of levels of conflict in the organization, generosity and benevolence determined by the leader's behavior. To a great extent, he doesn't account for all of the variance, but a lot of it. The same applies to turnover, productivity, to a great extent determined by the leader. Goleman continues. Our analysis suggests that, overall, the climate, how people feel about working at a company, can account for 20 to 30% of business performance. That's billions of dollars for many organizations. Getting the best out of people pays off in hard results. If climate drives business results, what then drives climate? Roughly 50 to 70% of how employees perceive their organization's climate can be traced to the actions of one person, the leader. More than anyone else, the boss creates the conditions that directly determine people's ability to work well. For instance, just 2 studies. One study, hotel management. The employee's mood was determined primarily not by customers chewing off their ear, not by the difficult hours. It was mostly determined by their boss, by their leader. That also determined whether they would stay in the workplace or leave. In research done in over 700 companies, 2 million employees, the number one predictor of mood was the leader's behavior. And that in turn, the mood accounts for 20 to 30% of business performance. That's a lot. So to summarize, what does the great leader do? The great leader creates an environment that facilitates growth. That means growth in terms of financial cost, financial growth. It means growth in the relationships, interpersonal relationships, and more than anything, it means human capital growth, because that is what determines whether the organization is successful. Today, when it's very difficult to hoard resources, when employees are volunteers, this is what determines long-term success. Let's look at the process of this growth. What does this look like? Let me share with you a model that I came up with to explain growth in an organization. This model talks about our cognitive state at different points in a process of learning, our personal ones or the organizational ones. The first step in this model, it's very difficult to find the source. Some people say it's from McGregor, but it's all over. Many people have used it, so I really don't know who to cite. But people say that the first person to use it was McGregor, who actually came up with theory X and theory Y. This is one stage where we can be in the learning process. Unconscious, incompetent. Unconscious, incompetent, this is where we are doing something wrong, we're making a mistake, an error, but we don't know it. For instance, I'm behaving rudely toward my employees, and I'm not even aware how destructive that is or the implications of what I'm doing. Unconscious, incompetent. Or you can take it to other domains, tennis. I'm hitting a backhand, but my follow-through is not in the right direction. I'm not aware of it. Unconscious, incompetent. The problem with being unconscious, incompetent, first of all, the significance of it is that everyone at one stage or another is unconsciously incompetent. Whether you're 18 or 88. The problem with being unconscious incompetent is that very often it leads to a downward spiral with the environment. For instance, an unconscious incompetent leader will upset the employees. More and more employees will get upset. The best ones will leave. He will attract people who have no choice but to work there. And the organization ultimately will suffer a great deal in the long run. Or in tennis, the way it can interact with the environment is that players will know your weakness and will start playing to your backhand, will understand, will know your game better. Very often this is what happens, which is why it is so important to have safeguards. What are some safeguards? coach, whether it's a sports coach or an executive coach, to open my eyes. Beautiful enemies. So important to surround yourself with beautiful enemies. 360 feedback. It's exactly the reason why we did it here, why it's becoming so popular in our culture. Emotions. What Sean spoke about last week, intuitions, moral intuitions, very often tell us when there is something wrong. The thing is that most people don't listen, whether it's to these intuitions or whether it's to beautiful enemies. They don't listen, but those who do move on to conscious incompetent. Now I'm aware that I have a problem with my backhand. Now I'm aware that I'm hurting the other person, myself, and the organization by being theory X or by being rude. However, most people, even though they're aware, they will go back, they will revert back to the unconscious incompetent. It is very difficult to change a habit. It is difficult, it is scary, it is challenging for many people. So most people just rationalize why they're behaving the way they are. Theory X leader rationalizes the behavior. But people who continue beyond very often go to conscious competent. I've just changed my follow-through in tennis. I've just changed my behavior. I've become more benevolent and generous toward my employees. Conscious competent. The problem here is that very often we go back to unconscious incompetent. Why? Because changing a habit is difficult. Remember John Dryden, we first make our habits and then our habits make us. Why else do we go back? Because usually we go down before we go up again. Right? If you just change your grip, those of you who play sports, racket sports, if you just change your grip, your game will go down before it goes up again. If you just put on a new behavior in terms of leadership, your performance will go down before it goes up again. And the inclination is to say, forget it. I'm going back to my habits, to the old and tried ways. Maybe they're not great, but they're better than this. This is also on the organizational level why it's so difficult to make a change. It is so difficult because there is no psychological safety, no space to fail, no space for going down before going up again. So a lot of conditions need to be in place for us to get past conscious competence to unconscious competence. This is where we're doing the work and we're doing it well. We're doing the work and we're doing it well. The backhand feels natural again. Being a Theory Y manager feels just right, as if I've been doing it my whole life, after forming a new habit. But there is also a danger here. The danger is that unconscious competence, because I'm doing things so well, because things are going so well, I develop hubris, overconfidence, or what is called success-induced blindness. Success-induced blindness. This is very common among highly successful CEOs. They do well, things are going well, and they stop listening. People's Express was an organization, an airline that started back in 1980. By 1984, it was worth over $2 billion. At the time, the fastest startup in history. Don Burr, the founder of People's Express, was on the cover of every magazine. I want to show you a brief excerpt of Don Burr. I'm not going to show you the whole excerpt. I'm going to stop after 2 minutes because we have to leave. But I want to just give you a sense of Don Burr. Until 1984, the most successful. From 1984, by 1986, bankrupt. Why? because he stopped listening. He was so successful, so powerful, that he stopped listening to his employees, to his board, to the surveys that were showing that People Express was becoming, in the words of many of the customers, people's distress. Don Burr, this is an interview at Harvard Business School.
Missed that whole thing, you know, like Gary Hart and with the women's revolution, it went right by us.
Let me try to explore a particular area, and that's this. Do you think that despite the, what would be your recommendation to a new entrepreneur thinking about starting up his company or her company? Would you recommend, do you still believe that this philosophy and approach to managing is a viable one for the long pull? It has a lot of attractions from a human resource point of view in terms of motivation and enhancement and development and competence and commitment and all of those things, cooperation. But it ran into some problems. And I guess the bottom line I would like to ask you about is, do you believe that it has applicability and has in other situations to other companies, despite the problems that you ran into? Or, and if so, in what way should it be applied?
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm, as I'm sure you know, Mike, I'm going around the country, around the world, talking about the efficacy of freedom, about emancipating people, and getting the energy flow that occurs when you do that. I'm writing a book about the glory of People Express, which was the emancipation of our people, the freedom of our people, of transforming, of talking about transforming organized settings from one of putting people in little boxes and telling them what to do for the next hour and don't do anything after that and I'll give you another order later, transforming that into freewheeling corporations where people are charged with responsibility and for getting it done and getting it done within the confines that that organized setting has. So I go around, talk about this. I'm writing a book about it because I think the highest leverage for me is to bring this kind of human thinking to the workplace to the best of my ability. That's the glory of People Express. The other thing that I'm talking about and writing a book about is the frustration of People Express. Is if that was so good, if freeing up the people was so remarkable, if they did such great things, if they were so highly productive, if they could generate the same level of revenues as American Airlines and do it with $1 billion a year less expenses, $1 billion a year less expenses, same revenue. That's how productive they were. How come it didn't work? Okay, so the frustration of People Express I'm writing about is these other things that we talked about. Okay, so what did you learn about the people things that didn't work? You know, and the people things that we talked about, the nature of leadership, and the fact that watch out for leaders who are too successful. When they get too successful, start trying to find a way to put a rope around them. Countervailing power. I don't think a CEO should be in a position like I was in. I had too much power. I mean, it took an extremely powerful board member to, after 4.5 years of going from 0 to 2 billion, to say, Don, don't you think you ought to think about? I mean, here I was, a multi-millionaire, and, you know, and on the cover of every magazine. What's he going to say to me? You're not doing it right? When every vision I'd had was in full swing? So a CEO should have a very strong board. A board of directors, we all complain about them. It's not quite right. Oh, they don't do this, they don't do that. They're not that bad.
So, give me 1 minute. So what he's saying here, and later in this piece, again, a minute later, he says, you should listen as a CEO to everyone. Listen to your mother, listen to your board, listen to your friends. That's how you avoid the success-induced blindness, and that's how you reach the spiral. Because the thing is, we all go through this spiral, and we'll go through this spiral till our last day. And the key is not to be here. It's inevitable that we're here at times. The key here is how do we spend the minimum time unconscious and competent. And to do that, we have to listen, we have to be open, we have to create a personal board of directors, a group of friends, of beautiful enemies, who will tell us where they are frustrated and who will also appreciate our glory. See you next week.